Kate Middleton is the future queen. Meghan Markle is the exile. They both walked into the same palace. So why did one end up wearing the crown while the other barely made it out with her reputation intact? Today, we are breaking down the system that basically chewed them up and showing exactly why the palace was built to protect one and push the other out. The role of timing. Timing can shape perception just as much as personality, no joke. In one case, there were years of public attention before the wedding, filled with speculation, headlines, and a whole lot of waiting around. That long runway gave both the public and the institution time to adjust to a familiar presence. When exposure happens gradually, it lowers resistance. Someone starts to feel known, normalized, already part of the furniture. In the other case, everything moved fast. Courtship, engagement, marriage, global spotlight, boom, all in a tight window. There wasn't much time for slow adjustment. A fully visible figure stepped straight into one of the most heavily scrutinized roles on the planet. In traditional systems, rapid change can feel destabilizing, even if no rules were technically broken. Institutions built on continuity vibe better with what unfolds slowly. Speed can feel abrupt, like it's throwing off the rhythm. This isn't about character. It's about comfort, and comfort shapes acceptance. Silence as strategy. Endurance under scrutiny often comes down to restraint. In highly traditional environments, discretion usually ranks above self-expression. Saying less, reacting less, letting criticism slide without clapping back, that's often read as discipline and respect for hierarchy. Over time, silence becomes a signal of loyalty and stability. Staying quiet while the public talks non-stop takes serious emotional control. In older institutions, that restraint gets rewarded because it reassures everyone that you get the rules, even the unspoken ones. No rebuttal. People read that as composure. And that composure becomes your brand. If you grew up around those traditions, that approach might feel natural. If you come from a background where open dialogue and advocacy are normal, the expectation of silence can feel strange, maybe even suffocating. Neither style is automatically better. They are just different cultural habits. But in hierarchical systems, quiet endurance is often treated as proof you belong, because it puts institutional calm above personal reaction. Entering with or without an established identity. Background affects adjustment, not worth. One path involved growing up close to long-standing customs, moving through familiar institutions, and slowly learning the rules that shape royal life. Long before marriage, that world was already recognizable. The shift was still intense, sure, but it happened inside a framework that felt known. The other path started outside that bubble. By the time she married, she'd built a career, earned her own money, spoken publicly about causes she believed in, and carved out a clear voice. That doesn't scream defiance, it screams experience. But walking into a hereditary institution with a fully formed public identity, that's a different game. Tradition-heavy systems assume newcomers will be molded by the role over time. When someone shows up with an established professional footprint and a history of independent expression, friction can happen. Not because independence is wrong, but because the structure wasn't designed for that starting point. This contrast is about alignment. Entering with fewer defined public edges allows gradual shaping. Entering with a clearly defined identity requires negotiation. And in rigid hierarchies, negotiation can feel awkward, even threatening. That mismatch can spark tension real quick. Before we go deeper, whose side are you really on? Drop a crown in the comments for Kate, or a heart for Meghan. Tradition versus modern autonomy. Institutions rooted in tradition move slowly and on purpose. They lean on ceremony, continuity, and inherited codes of conduct. Change is introduced carefully, absorbed quietly into what already exists instead of being announced with a bang. That pace protects stability, But yeah, it can also slow progress. Modern public life runs on a different tempo. Visibility is instant. Personal expression is expected. In today's world, partnership often means shared voice and equal initiative. When those expectations collide with strict protocol, the differences stand out. Royal life is built around defined roles: who speaks, when, and under what conditions. Appearances follow structure. Causes are taken on through established channels. Autonomy exists, but it's boxed in by hierarchy. If you're used to choosing your own projects or speaking openly about your convictions, that shift can feel limiting. Generational shifts matter too. Younger public figures are encouraged to be candid and direct. Older systems value composure, neutrality, and restraint. Neither is automatically flawed. They just reflect different eras. When both speeds operate inside the same system, misunderstandings can pop up without open conflict, fueled mostly by clashing assumptions about how public life should work. The comfort of familiarity. Familiarity creates ease, period. When the public sees someone again and again over years, at graduations, charity events, family milestones, uncertainty fades. The face becomes part of the institution's backdrop. Expectations build slowly. Even criticism softens because the presence feels steady and locked in. In one situation, the introduction stretched across years. The engagement came after long visibility. The relationship grew in public view. By the wedding day, many felt like they already knew her. The story had time to settle. In the other situation, everything intensified quickly. Engagement announcement. Interviews. Massive global wedding. All back-to-back. The public met a fully formed figure all at once, no slow burn. Opinions formed fast because exposure was concentrated. Pace shapes reception. People usually trust what unfolds gradually. They are more patient with what feels familiar. Sudden prominence, even positive, can trigger sharper reactions simply because it hasn't had time to sink in. Familiarity doesn't guarantee approval, but it often builds tolerance and a sense of shared history, something traditional systems value a lot. The weight of being different. Every institution carries unspoken expectations. When someone steps in who visibly differs from the usual profile, those differences draw attention. Not always hate, but definitely scrutiny. Here, several traits stood out: a prior marriage, an acting career, an American upbringing known for direct communication, and a mixed-race heritage within a historically white aristocratic structure. In modern society, that's normal stuff. Inside a deeply traditional framework, though, the combination broke precedent. Systems obsessed with continuity rely on familiar profiles to signal stability. When someone embodies broader social change, the contrast gets loud. Some see that as refreshing. Others see disruption. Difference doesn't automatically mean rebellion. But in conservative environments, visible deviation increases examination. The more someone symbolizes change, the more closely their actions are dissected. Institutions built on preservation instinctively protect what feels recognizable. When a newcomer signals shift, even unintentionally, resistance can surface as reflex, not some grand scheme. In these spaces, standing out carries weight beyond personal behavior. The mirror effect. Every institution has a mental image of itself, how it looks at its most polished and complete. When a newcomer mirrors that image in style, behavior, and pacing, acceptance comes easier. Familiar reflections feel safe. In one case, observers saw someone whose manner and presentation matched established expectations. That alignment reinforced continuity. The institution saw stability in the mirror. In the other case, the reflection looked different. Background, experiences, public voice, they brought in modern elements. Some called it progress. Others felt distance from tradition. When the mirror shows change, uncertainty follows. This contrast isn't about blame. It's about readiness. Long-established organizations evolve slowly. They absorb reflections that confirm their outline more comfortably than ones that reshape it. In the end, the reaction says as much about the institution's capacity to adapt as it does about the individual herself. Media amplification. Public perception doesn't just pop up overnight, it builds slowly, bit by bit, through repetition. Headlines, photographs, commentary, and editorial tone stack up over time, shaping how people are understood. When two women hold similar roles in the same institution, comparison becomes automatic, and language starts nudging interpretation in subtle but measurable ways. Academic analysis has looked at these contrasts straight on. A corpus-based linguistic study comparing coverage of Kate Middleton and Meghan Markle found clear differences in descriptive framing and narrative emphasis, showing how word choice and repetition can build totally different public images. The study isn't based on random anecdotes, it reviews patterns across articles, showing how tone and vocabulary shape perception. These patterns don't need some big coordinated plan. Media systems follow audience engagement, and let's be real, contrast grabs attention. One figure might be framed as steady and traditional, while another gets labeled modern or disruptive. Over time, repeating those labels just locks in separation in the public imagination. Coverage can shift, too. What starts as curiosity can turn into tension if that angle keeps readers hooked. Small tweaks in adjectives and emphasis, repeated across outlets and years, can harden into long-lasting narratives. What begins as a subtle contrast can turn into the main storyline simply because it's repeated again and again. That's how media amplification works, not through one loud headline, but through steady, cumulative framing that shapes how people think long after the original moment is gone. Pressure points inside the institution. Established institutions run within formal financial and constitutional frameworks that naturally draw scrutiny. In the case of the British monarchy, public funding is outlined through the sovereign grant, which details spending on property maintenance, staffing, and official duties. The annual reporting structure puts royal finances into published documentation and public review, making oversight part of the system itself, not something slapped on from the outside. Financial transparency doesn't erase criticism, it organizes it. Questions about cost, value, and relevance tend to show up louder during broader institutional shifts. When senior roles change and generational transitions move forward, public focus sharpens on how the institution explains its purpose and spending. Cultural expectations are shifting, too. Modern audiences expect more openness and measurable accountability than in past decades. Social media cranks up scrutiny and speeds up how concerns spread. In that environment, even routine adjustments can spark intense commentary. When financial review, leadership change, and evolving public expectations all collide, institutions usually lean into continuity. Familiar symbols and long-standing norms offer reassurance when things feel uncertain. At the same time, visible breaks from tradition can draw extra attention, not necessarily because they are wrong, but because people are already on high alert. When pressure builds, attention often zooms in on differences, reflecting a broader instinct to protect balance during change. The cost of adapting. Belonging to a powerful institution means adapting, that's just the deal. The question isn't whether adaptation happens, but how far it goes. In structured settings, adaptation can stretch beyond schedules and protocol into identity itself. Participation may require giving up personal routines, career goals, or preferred ways of expressing yourself. A quieter public profile might be expected. Over time, the institution shapes the individual just as much as the individual shapes the institution. For some, that trade-off feels aligned with their priorities. Stability, continuity, and defined purpose can outweigh personal preference. For others, the cost hits harder. Keeping a distinct voice while respecting established norms can create real internal tension. Plenty of women in earlier decades faced similar compromises in careers or family life. Jobs were paused, opinions toned down, talents sidelined to fit expectations. Those adjustments were often low-key, but deeply significant. Different outcomes may simply reflect different limits for compromise. Staying inside established structures and walking away from them both demand sacrifice, just in different ways. Leaving vs remaining. Public conversations about who survived often treat staying as the ultimate proof of survival. Remaining inside a powerful institution can look like endurance. It suggests resilience, discipline, and the ability to handle pressure without backing down. In high-visibility roles, staying means keeping composure under constant scrutiny and adapting without reacting publicly. That kind of survival looks steady and outwardly solid. But leaving can be survival, too. Stepping away from a place that feels off doesn't automatically equal failure. Sometimes, it's about protecting personal boundaries, identity, or family life. Choosing to exit an expected role can take just as much guts as sticking it out. The two paths come with different prices. Staying may mean ongoing compromise and accepting the role's limits. Leaving may mean giving up status, familiarity, and a well-established position. Both choices involve sacrifice, just expressed differently. It's easy to frame outcomes as win or lose, but reality's messier than that. One person continuing within tradition and another choosing a new direction aren't simple opposites. They reflect different calculations about well-being, duty, and belonging. Survival isn't always about applause. Sometimes it's about staying, sometimes it's about walking away. The larger pattern. From a wider angle, this story goes beyond two individuals. It shows how long-standing institutions react when the world around them shifts. Tradition tends to move slowly and deliberately, while social and cultural change can move fast, sometimes crazy fast. When those forces collide, things rarely stay simple. Established systems usually prioritize continuity. They absorb what fits existing norms and push back harder against what disrupts their rhythm. You see this pattern everywhere, in governments, corporations, families, and cultural institutions. The setting changes, but the instinct to protect identity stays consistent. At the core, the issue may not be who was right or wrong, stronger or weaker. It's about how institutions process change, what gets integrated, what stays at arm's length. That dynamic, more than personality alone, often shapes the outcome. If thoughtful, balanced discussions like this connect with you, consider subscribing and drop your perspective below.